Some of you might recognize that as the humor of Woody Allen in the film Love and Death. Let me offer you another take on love by Khalil Gibran. When love beckons to you, follow him, though his ways are hard and steep. And when his wings enfold you, yield to him, though the sword hidden among his pinions may wound you. And when he speaks to you, believe in him, though his voice may shatter your dreams, as the north wind lays waste the garden. For even as love crowns you, so shall he crucify you. Even as he is for your growth, so he is for your pruning. Even as he ascends to your height and caresses your tenderest branches that quiver in the sun, so shall he descend to your roots and shake them in their clinging to the earth. Like sheaves of corn, he gathers you unto himself. He threshes you to make you naked. He shifts you to free you from your husks. He grinds you to whiteness. He kneads you until you are pliant, and then he assigns you to his sacred fire, that you may become sacred bread for God's sacred feast. All these things shall love do unto you, that you may know the secrets of your heart, and in that knowledge become a fragment of life's heart. Love has no other desire but to fulfill itself. But if you love and must needs have desires, let these be your desires, to melt and be like a running brook that sings its melody to the night, to know the pain of too much tenderness, to be wounded by your own understanding of love, and to bleed willingly and joyfully, to wake at dawn with a winged heart and give thanks for another day of loving, to rest at the noon hour and meditate love's ecstasy, to return home at eventide with gratitude, and then to sleep with a prayer for the beloved in your heart and a song of praise upon your lips. So, two great thinkers on love, Khalil Gibran and Woody Allen, basically saying the same thing: love hurts. For many couples planning their wedding, the writings of Khalil Gibran are a source of great inspiration. And the reading you just heard is so beautifully written that the hard truths it contains are somehow lessened by its lyrical quality. But Gibran pulls no punches. He says in the second line that love's ways are hard and steep. He goes on to describe the way that love can peel off layers of our identity, making us vulnerable, and then go through an experience of purifying love. And he says that if we love, we should desire to know the pain of too much tenderness, to be wounded by our own understanding of love, and to bleed willingly and joyfully. When he puts it like that, bleeding willingly and joyfully, why on earth do human beings put themselves through the suffering that love brings? Or as cousin Sonia says in the film, to love is to suffer. And even her complex Russian philosophy can't really explain why. Love and Death is Woody Allen's 1975 homage to long Russian novels. In Annie Hall, his next film that probably is the best of all his films that depicts how love hurts, he tells an old joke. A guy walks into a psychiatrist's office and says, "Hey, doc, my brother's crazy. He thinks he's a chicken." And then the doc says, "Well, why don't you turn him in?" And the guy says, "I would, but I need the eggs." Woody Allen then goes on to say, I guess that's how I feel about relationships. They're totally crazy, irrational, and absurd. But we keep going through it because we need the eggs. The pain that loss of love brings is no joke, especially when we lose someone we love through death. In the grief support groups that I've led, I use a book by Alan Wolfelt called Understanding Your Grief, 10 Essential Touchstones for Finding Hope and Healing Your Heart. And Wolfelt, in that book, quotes an ancient Hebrew sage who says, if you want life, you must expect suffering. And in another chapter he writes, the capacity to love requires the necessity to mourn. Every time there is a disaster of any size, and we are watching one right now with the aftermath of Hurricane Harvey, we see people who are coming to terms with the heartbreak of loss. Some of them can't ever seem to deal with the randomness of their loss. Think about 9/11. In tragedies, some of them never even find physical remains, so that they can at least see with their own eyes that their loved ones are deceased. Some of you might have watched the HBO series The Leftovers, based on the Tom Perrotta novel. It's a compelling fiction about the instantaneous disappearance of 2% of the world's population on a single day, October 14th. Among those 140 million people were, Perrotta writes, Hindus and Buddhists and Muslims and Jews and atheists and animists and homosexuals and Eskimos and Mormons and Zoroastrians, an indiscriminate rapture. There is one character in the story, Nora, who loses her entire family, her husband and 2 young children. There 1 minute, gone the next. I'd like to read a passage from The Leftovers that delves into her grief for those she loved. For about a year, the last year they had together, Nora and her family had watched SpongeBob in the evenings, right before bed. Erin was too young to get most of the jokes. Her brother Jeremy was 3 years older, a kindergarten man of the world. And he stared at the TV with an awestruck expression, as if a miracle were unfolding before his eyes. He chuckled at almost every line, but when he really cut loose, the laughter exploded from his mouth in loud whoops that mixed approval and amazement in equal measure. Nora was surprised by how much she enjoyed the show herself. SpongeBob was refreshingly clever and even a bit edgy. Because she was such a fan, she was puzzled by her husband's indifference. She didn't have much more luck with her friends, the mothers she went to yoga class with on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, and occasionally out for drinks with at night. These women didn't share disdain for childish things like her husband, but even they grew skeptical when she rhapsodized about her favorite cartoon invertebrate. After October 14th, of course, Nora forgot about SpongeBob for a long, long time. She moved out of her house and spent several heavily medicated months at her sister's, trying to come to grips with the nightmare that had replaced her life. In March, against the advice of family, friends, and therapists, she returned home, telling herself that she needed some quiet time alone with her memories, a period of reflection in which she might be able to answer the question of whether it would be desirable or even possible to go on living. The first few weeks passed in a fog of misery and confusion. She slept at odd hours, drank too much wine to substitute for the Ambien and Xanax she'd sworn off, and spent entire days wandering through the cruelly empty house, opening closets and peering under beds as if she half expected to find her husband and children hiding out, grinning like they'd just pulled off the best practical joke ever. "I hope you're happy," she imagined, scolding them, pretending to be upset. I was going out of my mind. One evening, flipping through the channels, she happened upon a familiar episode of SpongeBob, the one where it snows in Bikini Bottom. The effect on her was instantaneous and exhilarating. Her head was clear for the first time in ages. She felt okay, better than okay. It wasn't just that she could sense her little boy in the room, sitting right beside her on the couch. At times, it was almost as if she were Jeremy, as if she were watching the show through his eyes, experiencing a 6-year-old's wild pleasure, laughing so hard she almost lost her breath. When it was over, Nora cried for a long time, but it was a good cry, the kind that makes you stronger. Then she grabbed a notepad and wrote the following. "I just saw the episode of the snowball fight. Do you remember that one? You liked playing in the snow, but only if it wasn't too cold or windy out. I remember the first time we went sledding on that old wooden toboggan and you cried because you got snow on your face. It was a whole year before you let us take you again, but then you liked it better because instead of the toboggan we had snow tubes, which took a really long time to blow up. You would have enjoyed watching SpongeBob tonight, especially the part where he jams a funnel in his head and turns his face into a snowball machine gun. I'm sure you would have tried to imitate the sound he made while he was shooting them, and I bet you would have done it really well because I know how much you like to make funny noises." The next morning, she drove to Best Buy, picked up a complete set of SpongeBob DVDs, and spent the better part of the day watching several episodes from season 1, a marathon that left her feeling cranky, hollowed out, and in desperate need of fresh air. For this very reason, she'd been careful about rationing her kids' TV time and understood that she needed to do the same for herself. Before long, she'd developed what turned out to be a surprisingly durable strategy. She allowed herself to watch SpongeBob twice a day, once in the morning and then again at night, never failing to write a brief entry about each episode in her notebook. This practice, it came to feel vaguely religious, gave structure and focus to her life, and helped her not to feel so lost all the time. In the past few months, however, something fundamental had changed. She almost never laughed at SpongeBob's antics anymore. Shows that she found amusing in the past now struck her as desperately sad. This morning's episode, for example, felt like some sort of allegory, a bitter commentary on her own suffering. Today was the dance contest, the one where Squidward takes over SpongeBob's body. To do this, he climbs inside SpongeBob's conveniently empty head, then pulls off SpongeBob's arms and legs so he can replace them with his own. Yes, I realize that SpongeBob's limbs can regenerate themselves, but come on, it's still horrible. During the competition, Squidward gets a cramp and SpongeBob's body ends up writhing on the floor in agony. The audience thinks this is pretty cool and gives him first prize. Quite a metaphor. The person in the most pain wins. Does that mean I get a blue ribbon? In her heart, she understood that the real problem wasn't the show so much as the feeling that she was losing her son again, that he was no longer there in the room with her. It made sense, of course. Jeremy would be 9 now, probably past the age where he would be watching SpongeBob with any real enthusiasm. Wherever he was on to something else, growing up without her, leaving her more alone than she already was. What she needed to do was to retire the DVDs, donate them to the library, put them out in the garbage, whatever, before SpongeBob and everything associated with him got permanently poisoned in her mind. It would have been easier if she had something to replace him with, some new show to fill the empty space. But every time she tried to ask her old friends what their boys were watching, the women just hugged her and said, "Oh, honey," in their smallest, most sorrowful voices, as if they hadn't understood the question. For me, that is one of the most affecting and devastating displays of loss. The person in the most pain wins, she writes. The ironic thing for us is that we know the price of love is pain. Pain perhaps because a relationship will die over time, because it loses momentum. As Woody Allen's character Alvy says to Annie Hall when they are splitting up, a relationship is like a shark. It has to constantly move forward or it dies. And what I think we've got on our hands is a dead shark. Love can also be pain in a relationship that will last until death. But even so, a loving relationship cannot be ended by death. The wedding vows may say, "Till death us do part." But when one speaks to those whose partners have died, they wouldn't say that they are parted from their loved ones. The feminist writer Bell Hooks observes that the practice of love offers no place of safety. We risk loss, hurt, pain. We risk being acted upon by forces outside our control. And so it is control that we lack, not love. And that brings us back to Khalil Gibran, who writes, "Think not that you can direct the course of love, for love, if it finds you worthy, directs your course." So some of us can become quite disillusioned with love and our lack of control. And one more quote from Woody Allen to that effect. "The most beautiful words in the English language are not 'I love you,' but it's benign." Now, if my rather idiosyncratic musings this morning have made you want to reflect more on love, then I have good news for you. This month, we are forming small groups called Circles of Faith that will meet once a month to have an in-depth exploration of the monthly themes that we're using for our worship services. And so all this month, our Sunday sermons are about love, and we'll be having some reading material in our small groups and questions about love that will be shared with those who have signed up to be in the groups. That material is provided by our sister church in Savannah, which has had small group ministry for some time now. When the small groups meet on the last Wednesday of the month, every group member will have the opportunity to share their reflections on the theme and on the readings in a safe and facilitated space. There's a limit to the size of the groups. We haven't reached the limit yet. Maximum 12 people per group, and we will only begin with 2 groups. This isn't like any group we've ever had here before. It's not a course where you have an instructor, and it's not a support group where you need some help in some area of your life. It's truly a spiritual practice to help us go more deeply into how we see life. And by sharing, sometimes at our most vulnerable, in a structured way, we find a special bond in the group that helps us better understand our covenantal faith as we build the beloved community. So who can join the Circles of Trust? Well, I answer that question by asking, what have you done in the past year to work on your own spiritual growth? And also, what have you done in the past year to deepen your understanding of what it means to be a Unitarian Universalist? And if you can't come up with an answer for either or both, then I would say you owe it to yourself and to the congregation to figure out what you're doing here. The circles of faith might just be the way you do that. There's a sign-up sheet on the welcome table, and you can ask me or Chris after the service, so please do think about joining us. There is one manifestation of love, self-love, that some of us are very poor at handling. I'll speak more about that next week, but maybe you can love yourself just a little bit more through the spiritual practice that the circles of trust can provide. And so to close, I would like to ask you to think and reflect on some of the questions that we'll be talking about in the circles of trust this month. The first question is, has someone's love toward you made a difference in your life? How did it affect or change you? Has your love for somebody made a difference for them? Is there somebody close to you in your life who is difficult to love? What makes loving them difficult? And if you manage to love them anyway, how do you do it? And the final set of questions, what experiences in your life have affected your ability to love? In what way? Are you more cautious, more open, more discriminating, wiser, or more confused? Next Sunday, we'll explore the reasons why humans have to have love. But I'll leave you with one more quote from Paulo Coelho. Love is an untamed force. When we try to control it, it destroys us. When we try to imprison it, it enslaves us. When we try to understand it, it leaves us feeling lost and confused. Whatever relationships you are in, whomever you love, may you be enriched by that experience, and may you be strong in facing any hurt that may come when confronting that untamed force. Because as Kevin Tarse's interpretation of the 23rd Psalm so beautifully says, I live in a house of love, love that will not let me go. I live in a house of love and always will. May we be the ones who make it so. Blessed be. Amen.